Hey everybody. So yeah, I'm a bit on location. I'm in a library. Fun stuff. So today we're going to talk about the disappearance and very likely death of a Saudi critic named Jamal Khashoggi. I'm going to assume Khashoggi is the right way to say it. I'm sure I'm wrong. Please comment about how wrong I am. So as the quick story goes, we've been hearing that this journalist, this critic of the Saudi government, has mysteriously disappeared in Turkey after visiting the Saudi consulate in order to get a marriage license. The Turks are claiming that Khashoggi was brutally tortured and murdered, dismembered into many pieces, and possibly had the body disposed of in Egypt. So this story seems to be something that came right out of the blue and is kind of weird, and so there's a whole lot to unpack. So let's go through that and let's figure out what's going on. So to start, let's talk about who Jamal Khashoggi is. He was born in Saudi Arabia, actually born to a rather wealthy family, but as he grew up, he became a journalist. There's some rumor that he was involved with the Saudi Arabian Secret Service, but that is still a rumor. Mainly what he sticks out for is being a critic of Wahhabism, which is the work of an Islamic scholar from the Middle Ages, which is the essentially, under Islamic theology, the idea behind everything that the Saudi Arabian government does. It is the radical ideology, not exactly jihadist, although, as we've seen in many times over and over again, that the Saudi government is a little bit more sympathetic to that kind of thinking than they would like to openly admit. And he was also associated with a group called the Muslim Brotherhood. He actually was, by the end of his life, we suspect, the de facto leader of the Muslim Brotherhood in Saudi Arabia. Now, you've probably heard the term Muslim Brotherhood before in the news and such, but basically it is a movement to try and reconcile the theological aspects of Islam and the legal aspects of Islam with politics, with modern governments. And so anytime you see a Muslim Brotherhood party, it's very diverse in its opinions, but basically it's an attempt to bring countries that are governed under Islamic principles to be more modern. Or they are attempts to maintain Islamic legal tradition within a modern political system. So really, depending upon what country you're in, they're either the reformers or they're the conservatives. Either way, through works with several newspapers, several news channels, he had been basically exiled from Saudi Arabia and forced to live in Turkey, and he was a regular commentator on mainstream news saying things that are very counter to what Saudi Arabia believes. Very big critic of Wahhabism, but also a big critic of Israeli settlements, which Saudi Arabia is one of the few Arab allies that the Israelis can depend on. He was also a critic of the Qatari blockade that happened last year, and eventually, he was banned from even being shown on Saudi televisions because he criticized Donald Trump, another big friend of Saudi Arabia. So Khashoggi went missing very shortly after entering the Saudi consulate in order to obtain a marriage license. His wife waited outside, and when the consulate closed, she reported him missing. The Turkish government says that they have video and audio evidence that Khashoggi was accosted inside the consulate by a team of 15 trained Saudis. He was brutally tortured. He was murdered. There were video evidence made in order to prove that he was murdered and that his body was literally dismembered. And there's records that a private jet left and flew towards Egypt before going back to Saudi Arabia. So there's thinking that that private jet contained the remains of Khashoggi, in which his body was basically disposed of. However, that video evidence the Turks claim to have has yet to surface, and the Turks seem to waffle back and forth on how determined and how certain they are that this happened. Basically, it sounds like there's some pretty intense late night discussions and phone calls happening between the Saudi and Turkish government. There's a lot of really big trade deals on the line with this, so yeah, I can imagine that it has something to do with that. How mad the Turks are at the Saudis basically will say how certain they are that they have this evidence. I imagine it's being used as a diplomatic chit, if you will. Another piece of evidence that the Turks bring up is that all of the Turkish employees at the consulate were all of a sudden put on holiday for that day. So that raises some suspicions. And so, yeah, this is part of a longer running debate and issue that's happening between the Turks and the Saudis. The president of Turkey, Recep Tayyip Erdogan, is a stout believer in the Muslim Brotherhood. He is a strong believer in trying to add Islamic principles to the more modern republic that is Turkey, while Saudi Arabia is one of the most powerful countries in the Middle East, one of the most powerful countries in the world, and really is a defender of Wahhabism and really tries to violently oppose the Muslim Brotherhood whenever it shows up in Saudi Arabia, because in Saudi Arabia, they are a representation of trying to bring in democracy and modern forms of government to the absolute monarchy that is happening there. And I think that the way that Saudi Arabia is acting with impunity says something about our current geopolitical moment. Another good example would be somebody confronted Trump to ask questions about this, and Trump's response was, "That's unfortunate, but really there's nothing we can do about it. We have all sorts of trade deals and agreements with Saudi Arabia, and so if we were to criticize them, those could be in jeopardy. And they represent hundreds of billions of dollars worth of defense contracts, which means jobs. So the US is not going to do anything about it. It's going to let Saudi Arabia just kind of do its thing." And I think that this speaks a lot to several trends we've seen in the last little while. People have been predicting the end of a US empire for a long time, but also we had a recent article come out where even Jean Chrétien, the former prime minister of Canada, even said that the Trump administration seems to be the end of the US empire. And the fact that the US feels like it is unable to respond to the situation, that its hands are tied, that it's not going to make a stand, shows that the position of global leadership is quickly fading. And I think that that is a good thing for the most part. I do think that it's a very good thing that the US is not calling the shots and telling countries what to do for the most part, because most of the time it is to bend the knee to global capitalism and to basically destroy any government left of their far-right republic. However, it does mean that we're going to see more things where there isn't an international community stepping up to say something. The United Nations is so weak and anemic that it isn't going to probably have the power to do anything of consequence in this situation. And so we have an international order where basically countries are going to do whatever they want, which in a lot of cases means, justice and economic equality and things, but also it means in the case of Saudi Arabia, being able to bully countries as much as they want, and nobody can do anything about it. Although you can push back against that a little bit and say that Saudi Arabia feels like it can do anything because the US has its back in a lot of ways. And so Saudi Arabia can be a bully because even if there isn't an international authority, the most powerful military is going to intervene on their behalf and basically bully them. Yeah, so the ongoing legacy of the US backing up one of the worst human rights abusers in the Middle East continues. And as this story develops, we're probably going to see a bigger rift between the Turks and the Saudi Arabians, but I don't exactly know what the long-term issue of that would be. They collaborated together to take out ISIS not too long ago, but what happens after that, we're not sure. Some people are arguing that this fight between two Sunni powerhouses in the Middle East means that this is a good thing for the other major power in this sort of Middle Eastern Cold War, and that is Iran. The United States has focused its entire foreign policy strategy against Iran, and both Turkey and Saudi Arabia are friends of Donald Trump, so who knows where this will go. Either way, I don't imagine Trump's going to do much because he criticized Donald Trump, and now he's dead, so I imagine that just makes Trump happy. Either way, I would be very curious. This is a kind of unfolding situation. I know I'm hopping on it a bit early, but I wanted to give a little bit of a context and explanation. If you have predictions about where you think this might go, I'm definitely listening down in the comments. I try my best to reply to every comment if there's something for me to reply to. So I look forward to finding out what you guys have to say. Otherwise, like, share, subscribe, Patreon, retention, bye.